I have a brother from another. I mean, we had an opportunity to meet and greet, and we talked a couple different times on some virtual coffees. But I think we really made that connection when we went to the Success Champions Summit together, and his company was a sponsor for that event as well too. We just kind of like just shot the shit, talked a lot of different things, and like the information just kept on flowing, going back and forth. So I'm gonna name Brett the Maverick boss for obvious reasons. We're going to get into like the meaning behind Maverick and what are we really talking about. So the floor is yours. Why don't you give our audience a little bit more about who you are and what we're going to be talking about today, Brett?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, and was a pleasure meeting you as well. I thought we had some really great conversations. So again, it's always really good to meet people in person, even though you've talked to them over the phone or had some VCs or whatnot. So appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. Brent Hale, founder, CEO of MaverickApp. MaverickApp is a sales enablement and prospecting machine, if you will, and it just helps. It helps with the workflow the sales reps have, help fixing that problem in the workflow and allowing a consistent effort in your business development and your engagement. So my background has always been in sales in some capacity. I've developed a lot of sales teams. I've also been an account executive in sales roles. And so really what drove me to kind of get with Maverick or to get Maverick in motion was really the pain points that I saw in sales and business development and hunting and why that job's so hard. So probably talk a little bit about that today and talk about, kind of the nuances of how I look at sales and how I look at that hunting aspect of sales. Avid sports guy, very competitive, and I love what I do. So thanks again.
Very cool. I think one of the key words that you said repeatedly, and I think you've just been programmed to say this because, like, the app itself by default is the gray area that people have the perception of it being more of a marketing tool. But again, your key word was sales. So let's get the elephant out the room. Let's kick it in its ass, get it out the front door. Like, define the best user case analysis for your platform, obviously starting with sales reps.
Yeah, so you hit it on the head, right? Like I say sales and I don't say marketing, and even from a platform perspective, we use certain verbiage within our platform that is not marketing, right? Campaign is a marketing word to me, sequence is a marketing word to me, so we don't use them because we want it to be understood that this is truly a sales platform. This is a one-to-one interaction, engagement, building a relationship, asking for business, asking for the next move, and then subsequent steps beyond that, right? So there's a ton that goes into sales beyond just the original outreach. Like your original outreach is one thing, but then there's additional touches that need to happen. If somebody says no, not now. If somebody says yeah, hit me up, Q4, Q3, whatever it might be. And even when somebody's interested in a conversation, there's on average 5 additional touches that are needed after a first interaction. So there's so many components to the sales world and to the interaction with people that you have when you're engaging in sales. But the problem is there's not a lot of tools out there that really help that workflow. There are tools that help a component of that workflow, but not one that helps all of it. So the idea of Maverick is, well, let's take and automate an entire front end part of a reps process, right? The hunting part of it. In order to do appropriate hunting, I have to find leads, and I have to curate lists, and I have to research, and I have to find email addresses and phone numbers and all of those things, right? But in order to reach out to them, I then now need another tool that's going to do that process for me. So I'm stuck kind of filtering through this list, even though if I have a system that does it for me, I got to find this list, then I got to export it, import it, map it to another tool that I've purchased, and then try to utilize that tool. Ultimately, what ends up happening is you don't use those tools correctly, or you don't use any of the other tool, and you companies end up spending a lot more money than they want because reps aren't really utilizing it the way that they were designed. So we've kind of taken that out of the equation. So let's just mix everything. Let's just take all the tools that everybody kind of uses and just create one thing that makes the sales reps life easier, not harder.
Good. So let's break down those components. I mean, obviously, I think the user base of this particular podcast, if they're not familiar, we're going to get them very familiar with your product and like the user cases. So a CRM, right? And again, that's a product that utilizes customers, right? And again, it's CRM, and then you also have email, right? So
Yep.
that may be Mailchimp. You may have HubSpot. Both of those platforms are marketing platforms. Your platform has elements of both those platforms, but it's used a little bit differently than those platforms. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So, 100%. So there's certain things within the platform. Yeah, you have your email component and, your automation of if nobody replies after X days, like I want this to go out and I want this to go out, right? But it very much is one-to-one in a one-to-one communication way. So it doesn't allow for big templated marketing, emails to go out. It doesn't have big pictures, like things that you would normally see within a true marketing email that 9 out of 10 times is realistically probably going to go to spam or junk or get deleted. This is an automated way to outreach and to reach a large amount of people, your target audience, but to do it in a more personalized way, to do it in a way where you know who I am, and I'm reaching out to you and letting you know who I am as an individual, but also as a company. And so one of the things about sales in general or business development is that a small percentage of your buying market is buying right now, right? So only 3% is buying right now, which means 97%, the vast majority, need more interaction, right? So your first interaction with people is simply asking them the question of like, are you a 3%er essentially, right? Are you open to buying right now? Are you interested in what we have? I want to build a relationship 1v1 with you. I've had this conversation a lot with people where, the difference between marketing and sales. And if you were to kind of paint that picture, and, really marketing is kind of, they tell the story of your brand. They tell the story of who you are and what your brand is all about. And then the rep job is to actually bring that story to life and to actually make people feel that story and feel what your brand is and know what your brand is. So the platform is designed to be able to do that, to be able to actually build a relationship so that people can understand your brand from you as the rep versus from just marketing material coming into their process.
Got it. So I mean, I'm just listening to you. I mean, you sound so data driven, right? I mean, obviously you're pulling all these insights. You've been in the game for a period of time. You've been plugged in, and it kind of leads me to the conversation that we had. And I kind of found out that you were a history buff. So I want to kind of like talk about like how does someone be so engulfed in history and then pull that into being more of an intellectual tech person? Like, is there some symmetry between these two philosophies?
Um, Maybe. I think I'm history because I'm fascinated by the evolution of it. So I think that there's probably a lot to that with bringing those two together because I'm fascinated by where we were and what we do now. And if you really think back and you're just like, I can't believe we did that, but we did, right? And in things that we built and things that we tore down, it doesn't matter, right? But history is fascinating because you see the evolution of us as humans, right? And so for me, the idea of Maverick happened 20 years ago, right? And just kind of in my work, I was always just like, why doesn't somebody do this? Why doesn't somebody do this one thing? And I never really thought in my brain
Hmm.
that I would do it. It was never reality. But over time, I saw the evolution of certain things, and I saw the evolution of like technology and this data, and you start to see it, and you start to live it as a rep, and you're just like, okay, like I'm living it. So it's one thing to be able to go and do the research and to pull all of these numbers in. It's another thing to live it, so I can actually say, I know it
Hmm.
takes 10 additional touches to interact with somebody. I know that just because I follow up with somebody when they said to follow up with them, that doesn't mean jack anything, right? It doesn't mean that I'm going to get a response. It doesn't mean I'm going to. So there has to be additional touches to that. So I do, I'm a history buff because I love to understand where we were. I love to understand like what got us to that point and then understand kind of our evolution from that point and to where we are today with everything. It's just fascinating to me to understand it. So from a technical perspective, I love to understand kind of where we were even 20 years ago and where we are today and how we're able to utilize that information.
I mean, yeah, I think it's a fascinating conversation because I mean, obviously, like in that conversation, we talked about like European culture versus American culture, and then
Yeah.
like we're talking about historical hundreds, if not even thousands of years differences between you can walk down the street in Europe, and that's pretty much the original like cobblestone versus in the U.S. It's been broken up and rebuilt like 1,000 times. So in your field of what you're doing, I think it's apple to apple comparison, right? I mean, obviously, there's been email marketing, there's been CRM, there's been sales forever, but now you're taking the things that you learned from the past and you're redeveloping and you're making it a systematized system. That way, it can be utilized to get the best results. Is that not correct?
Yeah, it is, and it's 100% correct, and it's very much kind of that similar evolution, right? And so when we talk about that history, it was talking about like go to Europe versus now, people come to Boston, they're like, oh, Boston's so much history, right? And then if you take that one step further and you go to Europe, you're like, okay, there's no history in Boston, right? Like that's there's so little history over there, and being in Italy and being over there and just everything that you see, knowing that it's thousands of years old, right? But if you look at it in kind of a weird mappy way, right? If we look at as we come west, the evolution, like what we've done, we haven't even really caught up yet, right? Like, so as we start to go west in the US, like, there's still a lot of old money on the east that hasn't really caught up to the west, right? And so yeah, when people are like, oh, there are tools out there that do certain things, it's like there's always room though. There's always room for improvement because we think about things differently and we've experienced things differently, right? And I think a lot of it is just coming to terms with the reality of the tools that we have. Like they're really awesome, but do they truly do what I need them to do, or am I just kind of on the bandwagon of they're really awesome, right? And so it's kind of, but it's kind of that idea of like you can just continue to evolve this thing, continue to make it better, and continue to listen to people and hear it. And so all of these things historically that we've had at our fingertips over the years, have been great, but now it's time for the evolution of like new things to come and new things to come out that we're not used to, that maybe go against the grain of what we're traditionally told.
So like, and I'm breaking you down, like, and I want the user to kind of really understand it. So obviously, like, you love history, you love technology, but when you combine these two things with someone that's highly competitive, which you are, like, it becomes a whole nother ball game. So I want to like talk about. I mean, in your bio, you were talking about being a professional soccer player. Like, how did that even come into this equation? Considering, like, as much as you love history, as much as you love technology, where did the sport angle come into this?
Well, I think athletes are competitive in general, right? So they're going to drive to be better than they are. From my perspective, soccer was just something I always did. I was a soccer player in high school. I was, I worked at it. It was one of those things that I really appreciated and that I really wanted to work at. And so, being able to get into a semi-professional type of environment was great for me. And it was a huge experience, and you learn and taught. I learn a lot. The funny thing about it is, as I started to grow in my career in soccer, the more I realized how good I wasn't at soccer, right? because I realized that there were people out there that were significantly better than me and that really have been doing this since they were 3 years old, right? And have the ability to put all the time in the world into it. And that was literally the only thing they did, right? So you kind of had to come to this moment of, in all reality, like, could I? Yes, I could, but maybe you're not as good as you've perceived yourself to be in the past, right? And so I think it's very much, if you're able to learn from those things, like a sport, you learn from it, you train, you develop yourself, right? Constantly doing that, and you should be doing that. It should be the same with sales. It should be the same with your job, right? Constantly looking yourself in the mirror and saying, like, where can I change? Where can I get better? Where do I train myself? Where do I not go to the gym, but where do I go to the gym for my job? Like, where's my brain gym at? And so a lot of that, I know we'll probably talk about it, but to get into the Maverick and stuff, like a lot of that is really based around the idea of what a Maverick is. It's like literally going against the grain, right? Literally going against like everything that we know and do something that's out of our comfort zone and see if it changes the game. And so in terms of sports, like I was always willing to like just be the guy that the biggest hustler, somebody that would do some untraditional things in my training. And that's kind of always, that was my competitive spirit, has always come down to my job and what I'm doing with other
Gotcha.
people.
So I mean, to quote the movie Maverick, right? I mean, you got some balls, Sticky Jockey, right? So I mean, like that's who you are. That's what you're representing, right? So like, just talk about like the name of Maverick. I mean, obviously there could have been 1,000 different names, and referencing
Yeah.
to Top Gun. Like, why did you pick that particular name for that software?
Yeah, so great question. I get it a lot. So I had originally started a digital company, and I had created the digital company called Heretic Technology Group. And so not from the idea of what heretic, like a religious heretic, but what an actual heretic is, right? And so somebody that just completely goes against the grain, does their own thing, like almost intentionally does something like different than what everyone else is doing. And so once we started coming out with Maverick and coming out and decided we want to build this product, the name was purely based on that. What's another name for a heretic, essentially? And that was a maverick. Like, be a maverick, be somebody totally different, totally, yourself, totally, against the grain, and march at a different beat. And so that's why we chose it. Now, as far as Top Gun goes and where that all came in, people kind of just started to ask us questions. And are you a Top Gun fan? I'm like, yeah, I mean, I love Top Gun. My dad was in the Air Force, like he flew airplanes. It's awesome. And so then as we started to develop and evolve, we really got super hyper focused on making sure that this was a sales tool and not a marketing tool, and
Hmm.
making sure that people were able to kind of separate the two and know that it wasn't. So that's when we started to think about our verbiage and some of the stuff we were using with Top Gun, and that we could utilize things that could immediately relate our brand back to something else, another brand that is popular, right? And so that's kind of how that evolved. It just evolved into this idea and people asking questions, and they're like, okay, well, let's just run with this. And it's worked out really well for us because we can get, talk about some specific things, and people are able to delineate the marketing and the sales part of
Hmm.
it. But yeah, I mean, the name itself is really, because I just believe, and I push to some people that work at Maverick, and the way we go is just truly going against grain, like being your own self, and doing things that are maybe a little bit untraditional,
Hmm.
and see what happens, right? And if bad things happen, cool. Like, I mean, nothing terrible is gonna happen, but be your own person and kind of go against the grain, and try new things.
Hmm. I think it's interesting because I mean, you brought up your dad. You were saying that he was pretty much a Top Gun pilot, right? I mean, he was flying planes, and so it kind of leads me kind of going down this the stem of the Maverick comparison. So your dad essentially is the Maverick, and you're Rooster, right? So like, let's talk about like this direct thing. Like, what kind of kid were you? Did you grow up in a competitive environment, like knowing that your dad was doing these things, or did you kind of grow into that as you got older?
No, so I've always been competitive, like to a point where my parents had to like bring me down a notch, right? So I would get so angry about losing at Techno Super Bowl that my parents had to literally get rid of our Nintendo because I would break stuff. I would just get so mad. But that competitive spirit, my father was in the Air Force when I was very young, but most of my years, my father was actually building a company as well. And so I learned a lot from him, both from building a company, but both the drive that it requires and the intention that it requires. And then of course the competitive spirit, right? I was kind of always raised up like there's not really a thing there's no such thing as second, right? Like second's not really an option, right? Of course it's great to get it, but the reality is a second isn't an option because first should just always be what you're striving for.
Hmm.
So I would say that I definitely get a competitive spirit from my father. I'm probably more competitive. He might argue with that, but I'm probably more competitive. But I definitely get a lot from him, and from his drive and what he was able to accomplish in his life. And a lot of that was just visual, just me noticing. It wasn't necessarily even something that he said, but I visually could see it and just be like, okay, that's something that probably has to be done, and if I want to get to this next level. Um, so I give him a lot of credit for a lot of stuff that I've done to date. Because he never gave in, he never handed us anything. It was just like figure it out on your own. And so that's kind of what you got to go do.
Nice, nice. So let's talk about you as an individual now, right? I mean, obviously, Maverick is a keyword that can define you and define your company, but what other 3 to 5 words would you choose to define or represent you?
Wow, that's a great question. Energetic for sure, outgoing. I think in a lot of ways, introvert and extrovert, depending on the situation. Um, I think a big one would be different. I'm definitely a different cat. Like, and I own that, and I'm okay with that, right? I joke around a lot. I'm serious. I'm not serious a lot. I'm serious a lot. So I'm a different person. I really try to walk by the beat of my own drum, and kind of be who I am. And hopefully that comes out and is good for other people that I'm surrounding myself with. But definitely energetic, driven would be another one. Extremely driven, and maybe in a different way than a lot of people are driven. I think we saw a talk at Babs, and they kind of talked about like what drives us to do what we do, and she felt like it was 5 layers, right? And I was like, no, I get to one layer, right? Like I'm driven by insecurities, right? And I think everybody's driven by insecurities. I could write a book about how people are driven by their insecurities, right? So whatever that insecurity is, like it just drives me. It's like whatever I'm looking at that I'm insecure that something might not get done or something might not get accomplished or it's not going to get done in a way that I think is good enough. Like that insecurity is just constantly driving me. So it's certainly driven. Is another one as well. So I think probably a lot of different words, but I can't say that I've ever had anyone like ask me to point it out on my own.
Very cool. So, I mean, I think you talked about insecurities, and obviously you're dealing with other corporations, you're dealing with B2B, you're dealing with sales teams, and you're dealing with all types of different personalities. So, without naming names, how has your personality and a conflicting personality have bumped heads, and how did you work that out over a period of time?
Yeah, so that's probably happened in both personal and business. I mean, you talk to a lot of different people, and people go through totally different educational processes, as I call them, right? So they've been exposed to totally different things.
Mhm.
I'm a believer in look in the mirror. So like, I've certainly butted heads with a lot of people. I'm outgoing, I'm loud often, I'm direct, and sometimes that doesn't sit well with people. So I think sometimes just kind of pulling back the reins and being able to communicate to myself off topic and then come back to the situation and readdress it has certainly been a way to do it. But also just fully respecting people and what they have to say and what they have going on, right? I've certainly come up against other businesses and other things that we've had butting head conversations. And I think at the end of the day, if you can walk away with just pure respect of, I respect your opinion, I respect where you're at, and go the other way. Nothing kind of beats that. But it's definitely, I talk about it with people a lot, and I'm not sure if like my directness, my outgoingness, like it's probably helped me in so many cases, and in other cases it actually hurt me.
Mhm.
But I've never really thought about it, right? That's kind of just who I am by nature. But I think in more ways than anything, it's helped me because I've been able to be, really honest with people and direct, and then get that in reciprocation. When I'm honest and direct with them, I feel like they're honest and direct with me. So it ends up working out okay.
So I mean, let's spin off of that. So obviously, you're a direct person. Like you speak your mind. You tell people exactly how it is. You require what is needed to get done for the job. But ideally, you're also a historian as well, right? So
Mm.
thinking about the time frame of where your business is and when you started it, is there anything that you could think about or a time that you would like to go back and whisper something in your ears to change the outcome to make where you are happen a little bit faster?
Um, No, no, not anything specific. I think there's probably a million things. Like if I'm able to go back and realistically look at every portion of that's happened, there's probably a million things. But I'm also very much of the mindset that I don't. I'm a very happy person. I'm very happy in my life. I'm very happy in my marriage. I'm very right. So like, I'd be remiss if I went back and said I regret something that got me to this point, or I wish I had changed it because I probably wouldn't have got me to this point, right? And so that means like something totally different would have changed in my life. So it's hard for me to go back. There are decisions from a maturity level that I wish that I had done differently. There are jobs that I was in when I was younger that I thought I was better than that, right? Or that I thought I was high up. I thought I was doing better than I was doing, right? I thought I knew more than I knew. So from a maturity level, there was a lot of ways that I communicated with my managers or communicated with direct reports, that if I could go back, I would probably, knowing what I know now, probably not have communicated that way, or been immature in that way, right? But at the same time, I was really young, right? It was early in my career. I only knew what I knew, right? I just thought I knew more than I knew, right? And so now knowing what I know, I think there are some bridges that I probably burned that if I could go back, I wouldn't have burned those bridges, right? And so that's been really alarming to me over the years, and mainly just because of my own education. Like I'm just starting to understand, like, okay, I didn't know anything then, right? Like I thought I did, but I really didn't, right? And so yeah, so nothing from a regret standpoint of like whispering in the ear of like go change this, other than I probably would have changed the way that I communicated with people at a certain point in my life.
So I mean, let's take that and let's unpack that a little bit. So obviously, you're talking about you wouldn't change anything, but I think in today's world, in the system that you're building and the automation that you're building, I think some of the things that you learn from your mistakes, you're probably like implementing that into your current system. So like, just talk about what systems do you have in place for like onboarding new clients when red flags are raised. How are those managed through Maverick?
Yeah, so big thing for us, customer success, right? And that does it comes with learning, right? And so we've learned even from when Maverick was here, we started it to now, like how we communicate and how we take care of our customers. We've been learning, and we still learn. But certainly in the past with other companies, I've learned, customers the most important thing. Customers a number one, right? And so a lot of our hyper focus is really on like what makes their job easier, what makes them happier, what makes what they're going to do easier, and that's right down to onboarding. But the biggest thing is just clarity, right? Like being very clear in what you're providing to people, being very clear about what your job is, and being very clear about what my job is in our engagement, right? Because that's such a huge component, because what they say about assumptions, right? And that's a very real thing. Like when you and I always talk about, like, when you don't have the right data or you don't have the right information, all you're left to do is create an unlimited amount of conspiracy theories in your head, right? So like without putting the proper information out there, good, bad, and different, like lay it out there so
Mhm.
there's no question about it after, right? And so that's a huge thing that we implement, and we're doing very active right now. It's just being very, very clear with what people should be doing and what the expectation is and what's outlined, right? And so from a product perspective, I've learned over time a ton about workflow and what's important, and follow-ups, and building a relationship, and being connected to the right people, and staying connected, and doing what you say you're going to do. Yeah, I will follow up with you in Q2. Well, you better follow up with somebody in Q2, right? And so from a platform perspective, we've put things in place that almost make that a no-brainer, because it's so important for follow-up, yet task management doesn't work. Great, let's eliminate task management, pre-create it, schedule out the send, and now your task management has been eliminated, but you're still doing what you say that you're going to do, right? So I think a lot of from our platform and learning of growing is like just almost eliminating the excuses from the equation for people. Just saying, because there are a lot. There's tons of excuses everywhere, right? So, but learning that there are certain things in your workflow, or certain things that you're doing with customers or with your sales reps, they cannot happen or have to happen. We try to build that into the workflow, so we make it dummy proof. We're like, well, we're just going to eliminate the excuses for you, and make it easy for you to do. In which case, that will ultimately make you better at your job.
Wow. So I mean, I think obviously it goes back to that key word that's behind your head for people that are watching the video right now. I mean, obviously you believe in what you're doing, you believe in your systems, you believe in your processes, you believe in your employees, and you believe in your customers. And it kind of goes back to what you said. Like your dad was a hell of an entrepreneur, so you grew up in an entrepreneurial environment to where you kind of got some of these information through osmosis, through seeing your dad doing it. Do you collectively say that you are who you are right now and as successful as you are because of being in that environment growing up?
Yeah, in a lot of ways, because there's a lot of things that he did that I don't do, right? Like that I'm like, I don't want to do that, right? Like I'm unwilling to sacrifice my family for the job, right? And not that my dad was willing to sacrifice his family, but that was during a period of time in which, like, you didn't have cell phones and you didn't have email, right? Like you had to work. Like it was, you had to spend the time, and you had to be away, and you had to travel, and you had to be in the office, right? And so some of those things I look back on, I'm like, okay, like I have the ability to not have to do that, and I'm not going to sacrifice, and I'm not going to do it, right? Because I know that he wouldn't have wanted to do it, but he had to. So I learned from it of like he just did what he had to do, but at the same time I learned from him like, okay, like, but like that component of it though, I refuse to like compromise on that, right? So from that, there definitely is, but then that work ethic. I think you're always going to see the work ethic. Like if somebody's in front of you with hard work ethic, if you have any drive in you, that's going to drive you to kind of want to do it, and have good work ethic as well. But I think it's like anything, you've said it much times, like I believe in what I'm doing, I appreciate what I'm doing. Yeah, and that makes my work ethic that much better, right? Like if you don't like what you're doing, your work ethic really isn't going to be very good. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who you are or what it is, right?
Yeah.
So watching him, and just, I learned a lot from both sides of watching him, come up in business, and understand both the sacrifice that sometimes you have to make, and then, but also understanding like your line of like where I'm not going to compromise, or, where I don't feel like I should have to compromise.
Hmm. So I mean that's a good segue to talk about like where your family are. I mean obviously like you're married and you have kids. So like just talk about like how have you learned to do like the work life balance, or is that even a real thing, right? I mean, or is your family included in your work life, or is it completely separated?
Yeah. Again, good question. I've been fortunate enough for years, even before I started my own company, to work from home. And I'm fortunate that my wife does well. So we're able to, does well as well. So we're able to piggyback off that, and she works from home. So it makes it easier for us because we can, we have that component together, and our daughter's here a lot. So, but it really has always come down to I work really hard when there's requirements that need to be done, right? But at the end of the day, if there's something that needs to be accomplished, and it's that or my family, and there's something that needs to be accomplished isn't really impacting anything, every time I'm going to drop that, I'm going to go to my family, right? And so it's almost like this forced, you don't work it in, not for me anyway. I haven't like worked it into like my process. Like I just force myself, like, right. I force myself at 5:30, I'm up, I eat dinner with my family, and when my daughter goes to bed, I kind of come back to work, right? But in that in between time, I don't care. Like there's no, like, that's forced time for me. Like it does not matter what's happening. That's what I'm going to do.
Hmm.
Right. So I'm not, for lack of better words, like I'm not super into like the hustle porn, right? Like go, 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 kill yourself, do it until you hate everything that you're doing, and like you can't breathe, think, or whatever. Like I'm just not into it. I don't think at the end of the day it accomplishes anything, right? Like I think that you need to hustle when you need to hustle, and when your brain tells you you got to take a break, like you got to listen to your brain, right? Like you just got to do it. So I'm a big believer in that. So I guess the long way around is like I don't really like bake it into anything. I'm very deliberate about it. I'm very deliberate of what I'm willing to give up and what I'm willing to not give up. And I just work really hard in the in between.
Hmm. So, I mean, based upon what you just said, I'm just going to pull some keywords. I mean, you're talking about being deliberate. You're talking about force, not in a negative way, but like you're waking up at 5:30. So that kind of leads me to like you're pretty structured, even though you don't want to be. That you are. So, what is your morning routines like? What are you doing at 5:30 in the morning, and how does your day actually start?
Well, so the 5 o'clock usually is the afternoon. So we do get up early, but really that's just, getting my daughter up, getting her ready to go,
Hmm.
and hanging out with her, getting her breakfast, whether it's bringing her to school or camp or whatever it might be. So again, a lot of my mental is, family, right? When there's opportunities to hang out with the family, hang out with the family. And then usually it's kind of go up. In the summertime, I like to get out there early, 7 a.m. and go do some yard work. Honestly, like it's like in a gym for me. So like I will put my boots on and go do yard work until 9 o'clock. I'll come in, take a shower, sit at my desk, and go. And it kind of just acts as my mental escape, and I can kind of get my day started with both some exercise, but also with some mindless work to allow my brain to kind of start getting into the day. So I love doing a lot of that in the summertime because it gets me going.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, but for the most part, pretty laid back mornings. I mean, honestly, like it's getting up and getting going, and it's kind of talking about your day and understanding like what's happening. But even that is, there becomes a certain point where okay, we've got to start our day now, and you go up and but again, I'm deliberate about that and strict with that. So when I get into my office, I'm there. My door is shut. Like I almost never come out, right? Like I don't eat. I mean, I fast now, but it all kind of started because my wife's like, well, you don't eat anyway, so you might as well just fast, right? And I was like, yeah, okay, I'll intermittent fast. So, I don't come out for eating. Like I come out to take breaks for to go to the bathroom and to get my tea or whatever, right? So those are kind of the things I talk about where like when I am in it, I'm really into it, right? But then I'm deliberate about pulling myself out of it too and saying, okay, it's time to shut it off. It's time to go downstairs and hang out with my daughter or whatever it is.
So I brought up believe and just hearing you speak. I mean, obviously you're inspirational, like you're motivating, and again, like you're a high achiever. Is any of this things that you can kind of relate back to, let's say, a book that you read or books that you're reading right now that you would like to recommend to our audience?
I thought somebody might say that, and I don't, I can't say that I have a lot of books that I can be like, hey, go out. Like I can tell you that these are awesome books, right? I've read a decent amount of business books. I've read a decent amount. I'm a big kind of, again, history buff, and that I really appreciate going and reading about history, and I appreciate documentaries, and I appreciate just understanding all of that, right? So I'm really driven by understanding what other people do in current day, and understanding how people are driven to that. Like people will do talks and people gravitate to those talks, and it's like that's their end all be all, right? And it's like, well, I got to do exactly what they do, right? And so that's fascinating to me, because it's like, you don't, right? Let's look at it, let's listen to them, and let's take 1% and go do that, right? But at the end of the day, go do your own thing, and go figure it out. So I'm not saying the books are bad or anything like that. I'm just being very honest in that, like, I'm not driven by reading a book about somebody else's like experience, like the entire book, right? Like that's not getting me to close a book and be like, okay. That said, Donnie Bovine, reading his book now, right? Like fuck, and it's cool because I get to hear it from his perspective, from like his eyes, from like what he's doing, right? And he's not telling me to do that. He's just saying like, hey man, like this is where I live, this is what I've done, right? So those are cool things for me to be able to read and to look at. So I read a lot when I can, but I also like to understand the here and the now. So like what are companies doing now? What are people saying now? Like what's changing? What isn't changing? What are people loving? What are people hating? And so I spend a decent amount of time kind of researching and looking at that stuff as best that I can.
So, I mean, part of that research, I mean, obviously, because you're such a historian, I would think that you're a world traveler as well. Is that correct?
As much as I would like to be. Yep.
So let's substitute that. I mean, obviously, like you're getting your information through leveraging history and traveling the world to a certain extent. So if
Hmm.
there's one place on this planet that you've been to that kind of resonates in your mind that you would recommend someone to travel to, what place would that be?
Oh God, yeah. So Greece, 100%.
Mhm.
So it depends on what you like, right? So Greece is just this incredibly cool place, and everywhere that I've been in Greece has been awesome, and primarily just they're just laid back. They're very even keeled. I mean, their roads are 5 feet wide, and they've got these things, and they're practically smashing into each other, and they're just thumbs up in people, like they're not yelling at people, right? And so that was really intriguing. From a history perspective, Italy was crazy for me, right? Because there's so much history in Italy, and there's so much out there. And I think I talked to you about this before, but vividly remember just being at this wall, and like the plaque, I don't remember the exact thing, but the plaque was like, this is the oldest standing structure in the world, essentially, right? And like I'm putting my hand on it, I'm just like, I'm literally in front of what we believe is the oldest standing structure on Earth, right? And so that stuff is just fascinating to me, that the history behind that, and to understand how far back that goes. And even what we were able to accomplish that far back, to know that it's still standing, right? So Italy, from that historical standpoint, was down in the Amalfi Coast, when I was just so unreal, to understand the breadth of thousands of years of history that was happening there. Highly recommend. But Greece was a phenomenal time.
So I think it's definitely fascinating because I mean you talk about history. I mean obviously it's a living, breathing thing, right? It's almost like an organism. You're personifying it. So let's talk about like where your company is right now and where do you perceive or where do you want to be remembered? Let's say 20 years from now. Like what do you want your company to accomplish in the next 20 years?
uh, well, growth, right? And so I get a lot of this too. Is like, what's your plan? Like, do you want to exit, or whatever? And honestly, like, I just want to grow a really great company that like changes the game, right? I do believe that it's broken in some capacity. I think a lot of the reason it's broken is because people won't just get in the mindset of like acknowledging that it's broken, right? They're like, oh, it's not broken. We have all these tools, and it's like, no, it's broken. It's okay to acknowledge that, right? And we don't, though. We're just like, oh, these are these really cool tools. Who these companies are worth $4 billion, so they must be awesome. And it's like, are they though? Like, you know what I mean? Like, are they really accomplishing what they want? Or are they just awesome because they're 4 billion, $5 billion company, right? Like, so are they accomplishing what you need? So I think over the years, I really am just hoping that we can get across to people that like it is broken. There's a way to kind of fix it. You got to be strict, and you got to be, you still got to work hard. but here's like a totally different way to think about it, right? Like separate your sales hat and your marketing hat and understand that they are two totally different things. They should work together, but they are totally different things. And so I'm hoping, with Maverick over time, and I feel like we've started to get to it, but over time that people are going to get onto this platform and it's going to be the sales platform, right? And it's going to be the totally different way of doing it. And then they're going to start to delineate and say we have sales and we have marketing and they are different. And guess what? We have two different platforms for them, right? Because people use Maverick, they're like, oh well, but we have HubSpot or whatever. I'm like, great, keep those. You need a marketing platform, right? Like you're going to need that next. Once Maverick finds and identifies and curates and emails, and you don't catch your 3%, you're going to need now marketing, and you're going to need put for a place for people to go in marketing to get marketing material, right? So we obviously want to grow as much as we can and grow as big as we can. I definitely disruptive. I had a conversation about this the other day. Like my goal really is to completely disrupt the industry. And I don't mean like disrupt it in a bad way, being rude. I mean disrupt it in a way that we're making people reconsider the entire workflow of sales and marketing.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it's definitely interesting. It's a hell of a feat, but again, like earlier on, you said you think differently, right? And it kind of like if you think about that expression, it's always been something that's been associated to Apple, and Apple has changed things a million times over, right? So
Yeah.
stepping into that space, again, obviously you have to play nice with these other, not necessarily competitors, but these other applications. So what does Maverick with the API integrate into? Does it integrate into HubSpot seamlessly? Does it integrate into other email platforms seamlessly? How does it play with other platforms that are out there right now on the marketing side?
Yeah. So we have Zapier, so it can plug into anything as it relates to Zapier. So I mean, if it has a Zap, we can utilize Zap, and they can connect to anything really seamlessly. Right now, that is the easiest way to do it because these other platforms are changing so much. Trying to hard code some connections into them makes it a little bit difficult just because of the maintenance. And Zapier has done a really good job of solving that problem. So we do utilize that, but we then do have Dev API that if somebody wanted to physically connect it, they could go into our dev portal, grab the API and actually build something for themselves. So they could do a full-on integration from that standpoint if they wanted to, that's customizable. So you really have two options to make it as customizable as you want, utilizing Zap or the API.
Hmm, very cool. So let's just talk about like the key demographic. I mean, obviously we're talking about a sales VP, a sales rep, sales department collectively. And if you're talking to them and communicating with them and you're saying, okay, this product is going to help you to then convert sales or to get more leads, what words of insight would you like them to listen to from you to actually hear what you're saying about your platform?
Um, it's a marathon, not a sprint, right? So it is kind of the big thing, right? I mean, it takes time. Like I talk data and talk percentage, right? Only 3% of your buying market is buying right now, right? And that's if you catch those 3%, which means 97% need additional touches, need more time, right? And so I think that gets lost on a lot of people because they think because they have a tool and because this tool is doing a whole lot of the front portion of your job that you should like just magically get better results, right? And it's like it's still the same concept. We're just automating a certain part of it, right? And so for anyone that doesn't know, Maverick is like templates, and then you go out and you tell them your target buyer. You say, headcount, industry, geographic location, seniority level, here are the title keywords, and Maverick goes out and finds and curates and finds LinkedIn, socials, email, phone number, company information, description, blah, blah, then automates that into an email sequence and starts scheduling those for send. So literally automates that entire front part of your business. So now it becomes, well, okay, I now have more time in my day because I don't have to do this stuff, which means that I should actually be taking care of these people through the funnel a little bit better than I was before because I have all this time, which means no more excuse for missed follow-ups, no more excuse for missing like what you told people you were going to do, and no more excuse for not being able to feed marketing, good, warm potential prospects that they can be reaching out to. So, the big thing is like with all of this is it's a marathon. It really, truly is. It takes a significant amount of time to build that subconscious relationship with people, and you have to. And only the smallest of percentages are going to respond to you right away. So I think it's really just getting people, whether it's Maverick or whether it's another platform, just getting your head wrapped around that. Like there's still a level of work that I need to do to convert a vast majority of these. But with Maverick, it's cool. Let's automate that front part though. So like I can actually now focus on how do I convert the vast majority, the 97, right? And let Maverick kind of do the 3% of it. So
I think you brought a really key point to this conversation, and I'm gonna play devil's advocate right here, right? Because I mean, obviously, I'm a big component of your product. I love what the platform is able to do, but in the education side of a new user, first time hearing your platform, they may have some red flags. And one red flag would be, okay, well, you're talking about sourcing email addresses from different platforms, you're scraping and you're scrubbing information. Like, how viable is that information for a user, considering that there's email laws, there's blacklisting, and all these other things that are out there right now?
yeah, great question. So one of the things that we spend a lot of time on in building it and do now is email reputation, and it's exactly right. And so again, from experience, we know what causes what, and that's a bad thing, right? So for instance, my in a past life, I sold email deliverability services. Like I literally, as part of the packages, that's what we would sell, is right. So we're really well versed in how to ensure that people are getting the inbox and not getting stuff blacklisted. But there's things that you have to do, right? So when Maverick's pulling in, it's like, we're only allowing a certain amount to be dropped into the hangar per day and then scheduled out, over the next 5 business days. So we've built Maverick in such a way that it acts like a human in every capacity from its working standpoint, right? So no 2 emails in 1 minute, right? It's an email now, 6 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 8 minutes, right? Very randomized to act like a human is sending it, right? Doesn't send on nights and weekends or any other time like holidays that you wouldn't send as a human. So it literally is designed to mimic you as a human. So we don't allow commercialized subject lines, right? Like things in your subject line that are literally a marketing subject line. We don't allow those because why? That's the easiest way to get a red flag and say, hey, you're going to spam. Also, another reason we don't allow images and stuff embedded in the emails, because again, easiest way to get yourself kind of red flagged. To answer the data question, again, this is something we spend a ton of time on. And if you could really look at the back end of our platform, you would find that the mostly the biggest power of our platform is the things that you don't even see, right? So when you're dealing with AI, and to your point, you're collecting different email addresses, most of the time, not most of the time, but a lot of the time, that data like gets mingled and intersected with other stuff, and like it's collecting somebody from a job from 5 years ago with an email address of today, right? And so we've actually built a system on top of a system on top of a system on top of a system that filters out that data even further. So once it finds it, it then says, hey, does domain match email domain? And if the answer is no, we don't let it go through, right? Because we're saying, well, I mean, if the email domain doesn't match the domain of the company, chances are there's something off here, right? Same with like verifying email addresses, verifying, and then it's dynamically talking back to us. So anytime somebody gets an undeliverable or they're not at the company, it dynamically talks to us and says, hey, if you ever find this person again with this information, it's inaccurate, don't send it. Right. So from our data perspective, we're very, very, very strict with it because I hated it. We all hated it, right? When we were doing lead research, and we were even if you go out and you find one of these companies that curates lists for you, okay, I'll give you 1,000 contacts. Oh, cool. Well, now I got to spend the next 6 days going through the 1,000 contacts to get it down to 400 contacts that I can actually find. And of those 400 contacts, I can, realistically only about 300 are probably good, right? But now I have to take that list and I have to import it into something else, and I have to do this. So there's a lot of work that still has to be done. So end of the day, I'm solving 0 problems for myself, right? And so we've taken that component, we've looked at it through a micro lens and said, like, let's get super, super granular with this stuff, because as cool as it is on the onset and from the eyeballs, the back end, the data still has to be really good. Otherwise, who cares? Right. And if I just promise you a bunch of contacts and you're like, yeah, cool, but like none of them are good, then, what value am I bringing to you?
Yeah. I think it's a hell of a system that you built, and the way that you just depicted it makes perfect sense. So it kind of leads me to like another devil's advocate, right? So I'm in the audience and I'm raising my hand and I'm just like, okay, everything you said answers my question, but one question. Let's say I have a large database. Let's say I have a list, or I created a list of 20,000, but you're saying that these emails are going to be like coming out like a person, maybe one every other minute or so, or every 5 to 6, 7 minutes or whatever. 20,000 emails. at that time could be a long period of time. So how does that orchestrate? How does that noise potentially work if you have a really large list? How long does that list take to actually get to those people?
So you can import your own list into Maverick.
Hmm.
We do not dictate the timing of when you import. We will always recommend that
Hmm.
you only import, and schedule out, a couple hundred a day, right? Because once you start getting your second touches and your third touches and your fifth touches, and then, right, like you just start to compound and compound and compound.
Hmm.
So we make it very aware to them, like, that you can't do that in most cases. And we have had some people that come to us to say, hey, we got a list of 10,000 people. I'm like, cool, you can send it, but it's going to take you about a year to get through that list
Hmm.
if you want to do it correctly. Right. And it's unfortunate, but that's just the way. It's not really unfortunate, right? Because if you try to do it otherwise, you are going to destroy your domain. You are going to hit spam filters. You are going to get, into a situation where you can never get to the inbox again because you just sent too many emails. you
Hmm.
know so there's recommendations in that scenario that we'll always recommend to people of, like, how they can do it to get those emails out. But again, it's still going to be a process. If you want to do it correctly, you can't just send 5,000 emails at once, right? it's just
Yeah.
it's just
Yeah.
bad business. It's just not going to work the way you want it to work.
Well, yeah, 20 years ago, right? 20 years ago, you could do a
Yeah,
mix up like that and
yeah.
get conversions. But yeah, so like again, so now the listeners listening, I mean, I think you answered these questions and brilliantly. So how do they get in contact with you? I mean, or do you want them to go to their Maverick website, social media? Like, how do they get access to you or to test out the platform?
Yeah, so they can go to our website, book a demo, or they can email me directly at Brent at MaverickApp.io, or our head of sales, Steve Wallace, and that'd be Steve at MaverickApp.io. Love to talk to anybody, even if they just want to jump on and kind of just talk and understand it. I love talking about this stuff, if you couldn't tell. So, I love talking about it and be happy to. But yeah, those would be the best ways for them to contact us. And then, of course, they can follow us on LinkedIn as well.
Very cool. Very cool. So that leads us into a couple bonus questions. And I think this one for you, because you're such a historian, there's no telling what your answer is going to be, right? It can be someone from BC for all the hell I know. If you could spend 24 hours with anyone, and that person could be obviously dead or alive, and you get to spend that 24 hours uninterrupted with them, who would it be and why?
um, so I don't know if it would be as cool because he'd be alive. Like, I think it'd be cool now, but probably John F. Kennedy.
Hmm.
I've been, since I was a little kid, kind of infatuated with the whole John F. Kennedy thing. I've probably read almost every book you can about the Kennedys, and, like, just because the Kennedy story is fascinating to me, right? Like, it's fascinating John F. Kennedy, but it's fascinating just the Kennedys in general and how many of them had died, and, like that kind of that curse of them, right? But also what they built, and what they built as a family. But I also think John F. Kennedy was like a totally different animal in politics back then. Like, I think had he not died, he probably would have created something completely different in the political spectrum than what we have today or that we're used to. Like, I think he would have kind of rewritten it.
Hmm.
So I think that it would be, and again, if he had lived forever and I could do it and there wasn't the assassination, maybe I wouldn't be so driven to it. But I think it would just be really interesting to sit down and kind of just understand at such a young age, like, speaking to people like that and getting into that view and what your family went through and what he had to go through, and his wartime stories. I mean, it's incredible what he did in the war, and, like, dragging people by his teeth to shore, from his U-2 boat. Like, that's just stuff that I would just, like, love to understand the mindset of when you're there and you're in that moment. What's keeping you alive, like, what's driving you, right? Because I've never been in that moment. So yeah, I'd say it'd probably have to be JFK.
Cool. Cool. Very cool. Very cool.
You
Like I said, I had no clue. It could have been anyone on the
Yeah.
spectrum, right?
I mean,
So
there would be tons of them, though. I mean, like,
yeah,
Caesar would be cool. Just,
yeah,
again, like, just to understand, like, that Roman Empire and, like, what that's all about. Like, there's
yeah.
just, there's a ton of them.
Very cool. So going into closing, man, I like when I interview people, especially people of your caliber. I like to give you the opportunity to become the host of the Boston Cage podcast. So now the Boston Cage show is yours. You're the host. I'm your guest. You're interviewing me. What questions do you have for me?
Oh man. All right. When did you start Boss Engaged?
February 2020.
What drove you to do it?
Surviving the damn stroke and just trying to figure out my next steps. But I mean, honestly, it was just kind of like it kind of fell into my lap, man. Like
Yeah.
literally, I was starting to learn more about the online platforms. I had got into Shopify. I started a Shopify store, and I was learning like all the nuances behind it. Got into a marketing group, and at the same time, I was writing books. And then I fell across a fellow podcaster, and he was having a topic talk, and he was speaking, and I was just kind of like, dude, like that's it, podcasting. And like in that moment, I was like, okay, I'm going to create a podcast. So it took me a couple months to figure things out, and then I started a podcast after that.
Wow. And then it's just been uphill from there.
I mean, yeah, I mean, the first year was more so me just kind of figuring it out because, I've had media background, more so the guy behind the camera, behind
Yep.
like the technology. So I understood the tech. But once you get in front of the camera and you start interviewing people, that's a whole different art form and style. And I started studying that. I mean, for me, more
Yeah.
so looking at Oprah. Like Oprah to me is like the pinnacle of like an interview, like the way her mannerisms, her body language, the style of her questions, the research that she does. And like I'm not striving to be Oprah, but taking
Sure.
elements from what I learned from her and
Yeah.
implementing that. But year one, I didn't know any of that. So now that I have a grasp of it, I make sure every episode I put that into it.
Sure. Yeah, it's interesting. So you said you went through a stroke to kind of get you to that point.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah, tell me about that real quick.
I mean, I was just working myself to death, man. It kind of goes back
Yeah.
to like what you were talking about with your dad earlier, which is kind of like, you working and working and working. And, I was jumping between multiple different corporations. At the time, I was a creative director. I had just got primary full custody of my son within, like that decade. I was building my company at the same time. And then I was like, I got to learn more. So I became a travel agent. I became an insurance agent. I was growing an agency. I started working at multiple different companies, like 30 days here, 60 days there, 90 days there, and I was just learning their systems and then leaving that company and I was adding what I learned from that company into my processes, into my systems. So I think I just bit off way more than I can chew as an
Yeah.
individual person versus, you know, hiring the right people and hiring people that were good at what they were doing and outsourcing to people versus trying to do everything internally in my head. It was kind of like my head was this big, but in
Sure.
reality, like my brain was like expanding this far and my head just couldn't handle it. And obviously my shit just popped. So
Yeah, you hear a lot about that. So I mean, I'm not, it's a tough situation, but not entirely surprising to understand like you hit a wall at some point, you know what I mean? Like you ever look back now and feel like there's a particular moment where you either said like I I'm not gonna make it or I am gonna make it, you know what I mean? Like there's
as,
that.
as far as the success or as far as being alive?
That's a great point. Well, so I would say both, but I did mean more on the success side of things and kind of where you are with the company.
Yeah, I think that goes for every entrepreneur. I mean, I've had an opportunity to interview hundreds of people on this particular show, and I could hear it in their voices at one time or the other. There's always that sense of doubt, right? There's always that hurdle. There's always an obstacle, but even in that sense of doubt, there's always that light at the end of the tunnel. There's always opportunity for you to push forward. So I think just like any other entrepreneur, whether I'm successful as I want to be, hell no. I think there's still so much more I can do and I'm going to do. I'm just not where I want to be, but the perception to someone that's now meeting me be like, oh my god, he's doing all these different things and he has this level of success. But in my mind, I'm like, dude, I'm like a drop in the ocean. Essentially, I want to be my own lake, if that makes sense.
Yep. Yeah. No, it totally makes sense. I mean, it's refreshing to hear because now, of course, even, but certainly as I was growing this thing, even to where it is now, I mean, the amount of times where I was just like, what am I doing? Like, seriously, like, what am I doing? Like, what, like, what? Like, I have no idea what I'm doing. Like, I'm not sure of the next steps. Like, is this the smart thing to do and the right thing to do? So it's kind of refreshing to understand, to your point, I think every entrepreneur probably goes through it, you
Yep.
know, what's one piece of advice that you like to give people about kind of just your experiences of like, this is a big thing that I learned, this kind of shaped my direction of thought process or whatever. What's one thing you like to tell people?
Oh man, there's so many different variables to that question, but I would say just look as everything as small bites, and it kind of goes back to the analogy that I said: a drop, a lake, and versus the ocean. I mean, everyone's viewpoint is that they want to be the abyss. They want to be the largest, the biggest things on the damn planet. But you have to understand that it starts with one drop, right? Think of it more like a leak, of a leaky pipe. If the pipe keeps leaking, eventually that water will fill up your basement, and then it'll come out your house, and then eventually it'll just keep going, right? So you
Yep.
have to kind of think about these small steps. You can't be the ocean overnight. The ocean
Right.
wasn't essentially formed overnight. Like you and I, we talked about like the Grand Canyon. That shit didn't happen overnight. It didn't get that big just woke up on a random Tuesday and was like, oh, there's a hole in the fucking earth. Like that shit doesn't happen. You have to
Right.
take these steps and procedures.
Yep.
And for me, it was going through everything that I went through because again, I didn't hit the level of success I am at now until I had to go through all that bullshit, almost die, and then create this new brand and rebrand myself. And then in less than 2 years, everything I've done in 2 years outweighed what I've done 15 years before it. It was like a
Right.
night and day. It was like,
Right.
what the hell? 2 years versus 15 years? Why the fuck didn't I do that 15 years before?
Right. Right. Don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, great. I mean, great advice. I agree wholeheartedly. And I agree reluctantly because like I've fallen into that same boat, right? And so, um, it's hard to get around that, right? Because you see everybody because and I think we talked about this. Like most of the people you hear about, like, are all the big fish. Like, of course you're going to hear about them, right? Because they're big. Like that's what they are. But you're talking about the smallest of percentages that you're hearing about, right? Like there are all these other companies that are doing phenomenal things that you have absolutely no idea about, and and they're doing great, and you don't, your brain doesn't get there, right? Your brain's on the big fish of like, I gotta be, Salesforce or whatever, and it's like, no, you don't. Like it's okay, just grow something great. So yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly, but it's good
Yeah.
advice.
Yeah, I mean, I think that to that last point that you just made, I mean, the irony of it is like, I had opportunity to interview a billionaire on the show before, and she was ranked number 21 on Forbes, but she's not a household name. And to put things in perspective, I was like, okay, look, Oprah is ranked number 10. This female is ranked number 21. And then I was like, the founder of Spanx is ranked number 22, 23. So
Yeah.
everyone knows the founder of Spanx, but
Yep.
nobody knows this individual person. But the irony was, as I was interviewing her, one, she's humble, but two, more importantly than anything else, she made this statement that resonated with me. She was like, well, like people don't really know who she is, but 3 out of 5 homes has her product in it, like
That's it.
on a global scale. So you
Yeah.
may have never have heard her, but you're using her products every single day, and she's living the life because of that. But she's not a household name. So it goes back to your point. There's people that are, you could be sitting down at a damn Waffle House next to someone that's worth $10 billion, will never even know. Have no
No,
idea.
no clue.
No
Yep.
clue.
You have no idea, and it doesn't, and in the grand scheme of it, it doesn't matter, right? And so, yeah, I think that's I didn't know that you had done that, but that's a really good example, right? I mean, they're literally right next to each other on the Forbes, and you have no idea who she is. So
No idea who she is, but I mean,
yeah,
she's a semiconductor manufacturer and the third, the third largest in the world at that. So it just kind of
yeah,
shows to say that again, you could never know, and it's probably more of a perception for that individual to bet that's a better life to live than saying Jeff Bezos. Like Jeff Bezos can't go to the corner store, he can't
correct.
go to the gas station, but
No,
she
no.
could easily go to the gas station and go to the drugstore and not have any problems whatsoever.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. I mean, it's true. And even from a driving perspective, like I do often think back, like those big companies though too. It helps me because at one point they were nothing, right? So like I do think back. We even talked about this, like Jeff Bezos with that like stupid print of Amazon in his office. Like he had zero clue at that point where his success would be, right? But he just kept driving it forward and driving it forward. He had no idea he'd eventually be the richest man in the world, right? And not necessarily that's where he was even driving to. Like his drive was just like build Amazon to a cool online book company, right? And so, but every one of these, Walmart, like even JP Morgan, like all of these, like at some point they were nothing, and they just had to drive to something. And and I think we both talked about it a little bit to length, but just the idea that it takes time. Like it starts with a drop of water, right? And you just got to build and grow, and just do the right things, and the rest will kind of follow.
Yeah, and I think on a closing note, I mean, going back to the image behind you, I mean, it just becomes the belief in yourself, the belief in the product, the belief in the service, the belief in the brand, and the belief in like you said earlier, changing the world and believing that you're actually going to do it and then actually do it.
Yeah, this is behind me because I do love this. Is it this one? Yeah,
Yep.
because I do love the show, Ted Lasso. But I just love the sentiment of it, like what it is. It's so simple, yet it's so powerful, right? Like literally, if you just believe in kind of what you're doing and believe in the path that you're going, like it speaks volumes. Like I'm a big believer in manifestation. I truly believe that I can manifest almost anything that I want in terms of my life, to an extent, right? But that goes with believing. It's because like you truly believe that it's possible. You truly believe that it's going to happen. So I have this behind me because it's so important to kind of just my mentality is just always believe. When I sit at my desk every day, I just believe, right? And if I have that in my heart and my head, I believe that it'll happen. So yeah, so big fan of kind of just the simple mentality of believe in what you're doing and believe which direction you want to go.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think on that note, I mean, I think this was a hell of an episode. I definitely appreciate you being here today and dropping like the insights of who you are as a person and what your philosophies are and what your company is designed to do and how they're helping people in the world of sales today. So I definitely appreciate you being here.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it was a blast. I had a lot of fun. I figured it would be though, because we tend to have some good conversations. So I thank you so much for having me on. It's been awesome. Really glad I was able to share with everybody what we're doing, and hope we can kind of reach more people, in the future. So thanks.
Yep. Yep. Well, I think on a side note, I mean, obviously, next step is for you to become a podcaster yourself, or at least
Right.
start a podcast for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, we talked about that. We will definitely do it. It's a must. It's something that we need to do, and we've been talking about it for a while. So, we just need a little guidance, boss guidance, I guess. Yeah.
Well, definitely appreciate you, man. SA Grant, over and out.